Hey everyone, lot of books to catch up on. Today I'm going to do a review on The 100 Year Life, and I can't even remember who it's by. I read it about 3 weeks ago, but it's really, really good. It's something that somebody else who I really admire had told me she was reading. I thought I'll read that too. Um, and I went into this reading it on the assumption of what it was about, and that was the idea that we live longer lives now, and therefore we can afford to approach life in a different way than the traditional, what's called the three stage model, which is education, career, retirement, which worked if you live until about 60. So you spend the first 20 years getting educated, then based on that education, you get yourself a career, and then you work for about, you know, I don't know, 40 odd years, and then you retire at 60 and everything's fine. Now, the average life expectancy of somebody who was born in the 80s, for example, is about 105 based on one model of calculating things. If you look at the current model, then people who are dying, they're dying in their 80s. But by the time people like me or anybody else who's say in their early 40s reaches death, it will probably be about the age of 100. Now, that has lots of different implications. One of them is that the traditional model of saving a small amount of your income, working for about 40 years and having a comfortable retirement isn't going to work anymore. You need to save more because you'll probably be retired for longer. The other one is that you don't necessarily just have one career anymore, because take somebody in their early 40s, for example, me. If I was in my early 40s based on the traditional three stage model and I hadn't established a career, or I hadn't, set my life up properly, then you probably be safe in assuming, based on a 60, 70 year lifespan, that, oh, you passed it, you've messed up, you'll never be anything. Let's assume, though, that you're 40 years old, or even 20 years old, but let's play it on a 40-year-old perspective for now. Let's assume you're 40 years old, you're going to live till 100. That means you've got 60 years. So if you started a new career now, that would be the same as somebody who died at 60, starting a new career the moment they were born. What are their chances of success given the amount of time they've got? Great. Also, a 40-year-old's probably got better work ethic than somebody who's 20, knows a bit more about life. So that really, the book in that sense really gave me a boost, really made me think, hang on, I can pretty much still do anything I damn want to. And I've always loved that feeling of freedom. So for me, the book was uplifting in that manner. Another thing I really liked about the book is that it defines different classes of assets. Now, most people, when they think of assets, they're going to think of, well, what's my greatest asset? Oh, my money, my home, my car, I don't know, my ability to earn money, my job, my looks, whatever. But it doesn't talk about the things that have always seemed most important to me. The traditional definition doesn't. An asset, as defined in this book, is something which returns value to you. And it talks about intangible assets, knowledge and the ability to learn. Now, that's something a lot of people will refer to. Power, knowledge is power. That's bullshit. Knowledge is useless until you use it. So get as much as you can and then use it. Friendships, relationships, family, health. These are assets mentioned in the 100-Year Life. And when I heard that, I thought, absolutely, yes, spot on, whatever. Nowhere else have I read that or heard that before. An asset is always your job, your status, your rank, your anything to do with money. Money is one part of life. So I really loved the book for that. And also it really made me think about, it gave me that sense of possibility. And it made me do a lot of thinking as well. And one of the things I thought is, what are the most valuable things in my life? Yes, they're actually my friendships. Am I past it? No, absolutely not. Now, let's say you're not an old fart like me. You're not in your 40s. Let's say you're 20. Or let's say you're, what do I say to the older people now? A mature fart? No, let's say you're a well-aged wine and you want to make a change and you're in your 50s or your 60s. Well, based on a 100-year life, you probably can. Yeah. Think of the idea, let's say if you're 50 now and you're going to live till 80, you've got 30 years. But I want to retire. I think retirement's really overrated, personally. What are you going to do? Sit around? If you stop using your muscles, it leads to brain damage faster. If you're going to get not brain damage, sorry, but neurological decline. So older people, there seems to be more and more about this written in the newspapers as well, where older people, they'll, are more physically active, and there are people, for example, there was a story about a 105-year-old cyclist who had the same cognitive ability and acuity as somebody about 50 years old on average. No surprise that he was written about as a cyclist, because he'd actually set a new world record for his age group. And I imagine there's not many people in that age group, so it can't have been that difficult. But still, he must have been pretty good. All right? How many 105-year-olds are there? Probably not that many. Although the oldest person was a French woman who's assumed to have lived till about 117. Imagine living till 117. Oh my God. Now I may... I was going to say I may confuse parts of this book with the book I read afterwards, but I won't, because I've just kind of separated them in my mind. In terms of a rating for the book, The 100-Year Life, I give it 9 out of 10. I'd probably give it 10 out of 10. It concentrated a lot on financial planning and everything, which is a bit of a dry topic, not because it's not important, but I've heard so many books and read so many books on it, and there's a few truths which seem to be repeated again and again, which makes sense. The truth doesn't change. What works generally doesn't change over time. You need to save more of your money than you spend. Doesn't matter what your income is. If you're spending more than you're saving, you're going to end up broke anyway. And unless you want to work for the rest of your life, you better set up something that makes money for you. Maybe investments, maybe a trust fund. Although a trust fund's an interesting thing if it pays you. Generally, children who have it easy and have everything provided for them and given to them and are never actually pushed into a tight situation to do something for themselves don't do that well. A lot of people will refer to that as the welfare mindset, which I disagree with, because I think welfare is very important. I do think we need to tax the rich and not just turn every country into a fucking kleptocracy like the UK is becoming under the rule of people like Boris Johnson. There was a video, I didn't bother watching it, and it was Nigel Farage complaining that Britain is broken. No, it was actually an article, and the writer John Harris cleverly pointed out, not cleverly, but pointed out the obvious, that you're the cunt who broke it with all your bullshit. But I'm getting off topic now. 100-Year Life. Let's hope Nigel Farage doesn't have one. Imagine the damage that retard could do, but I'm sure he'll get richer in the process. I can't avoid these little political rants. Let's go back to the book. Definitely worth reading. Another thing it talks about is the fact that as people are living longer and they have more opportunities. So, for example, you might have somebody who's 40 and decides, I'm going to go and retrain now. I'm going to do a degree. So you have less segregation of different age groups, which could lead to more of what the writers refer to as an Asian way of thinking, where there's more respect for the elderly. There isn't so much ageism. People aren't so segregated. There's less of a sense of us and them with the young and the old, and that's generally better for society. And based on a lot of books I've read, the extended family is generally better for the development and mental health of children, prevents the, and there's a book, and one book in particular comes to mind, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. Really, really good. And in that, the psychiatrist who wrote it, Bruce Perry, I think is Matthew Perry, Bruce Perry, is probably reviewed somewhere else on this channel, talks about the fact that a lot of people who end up with severe psychosis, and there was a case of boy in that story who raped and stabbed to death two 13-year-old girls when he was a teenager, but because he hadn't had certain parts, he hadn't had certain things provided as a child growing up. For example, he was often abandoned in his cot for 8 hours a day. His mother wasn't that capable. Now, he had an older brother who didn't end up stabbing or murdering or raping or anybody, but he had been raised by the same mother while she was living with an extended family. So where the mother was lacking in certain abilities, the aunts or the uncles or the grandparents today, what that actually meant was the elder brother, who was a plumber, by the way, his brain developed properly. A lack of touch, a lack of empathy, a lack of attention given to children can actually lead to certain parts of their brains not developing. And the older they get, past the age of about 5, it gets really difficult to actually address those bits of brain damage, would you call it? Undeveloped brain. The harder it becomes past the age of about 5. So anyway, this kid never developed empathy because he was left in his cot, because he wasn't raised. How does this relate to 100-Year Life? Because in the 100-Year Life, the idea is that there'll be more of this idea of extended families working again. And that can prevent situations like this kid who went on to become so cold, so lacking in empathy, that when he was sentenced and he saw the family of the victims crying, he asked the psychiatrist who was present at the sentencing, he said, "Why are they crying? I'm the one going to prison." Because he just didn't understand empathy or relationships. This happens a lot. When you read a lot of books, you see how the ideas kind of intermingle, right? But yeah, 100 Year Life, very, very good book. Recommend it. I'll probably, I actually listened to it rather than read it. I had it on Audible, whilst I was decorating a room. So I just decorated the room and listened to the book, which was a great way to use Audible because decorating is boring. I guess you could just listen to music, but it's a great book. I'll give it 9 out of 10. If lots of the material was less familiar, I probably would have found it more interesting and it would have got a 10 out of 10. Recommended. Can't remember the author, but I'll look up the author before I actually post this review. Alright, thanks.